before we get into anything JNT, I have a confession to make. After the TL 100 series, I messaged a friend of ours, Vape Buyer, shout out to you. He is a big TL fan, and I messaged him saying, quote, that's why you can't give him Lee, obviously referring to Closer. Also, don't even worry, TL will still be in Chicago, I promise. CLG, TSM, C9, whoever else is left aren't going anywhere, end quote, is what I messaged him. And boy, was I immediately wrong come Sunday. I think, J&T, we got to start with the EGC9 series. And I guess on that note, quick intro. Blue Jay and J&T 250 for episode 98 of the Clown Fiesta podcast. This week, we get into how C9 dismantled EG, why TL couldn't complete the reverse sweep, and who's going to take that last world spot. J&T, I'll let you start, man. Wild series on Sunday. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I think coming into this last series of the weekend, everybody thought that at the time before the series had started, that this was going to be the most one-sided in terms of everybody thought that EG was the favorite, and everybody thought that CloudN was the clear underdog. And I think right from the beginning of the series, we really saw C9 kind of assert their dominance with what they wanted to do in the draft, and also kind of take it to EG, especially within the early game. One of the ways that I think we've talked about this EG roster all year is that while their early game isn't necessarily their strength, it's not one of their weaknesses, and they're usually able to have pretty stable early games for the most part. But C9 was doing their best to disrupt that early game as much as possible. Blabber kind of filling the inspired role in this series here, where he's ganking almost every single lane, farming really, really well, and just shutting down the opposing jungler from making any plays whatsoever.
Yeah, and quick thing, I also forgot to mention that we are on different setups this week. So J&T's in a different location. There's a huge storm going on outside. My internet might cut out any time now. Just a disclaimer, guys. We know that our quality is going to be worse this week. We apologize, and we're going to try to be better on that next week. Back to your point, talking about the jungle matchup, J&T. This was completely night and day from what we had seen all summer long. It was supposed to be inspired, the clear MVP coming in and absolutely stomping not even Blabber, but just Cloud9 in general, who looked shaky all over the map for most of summer, right? Like some good, some bad, just a lot of inconsistency. And we didn't see that at all. Really, like, yeah, just unpredictable how this series went. And I know a lot of people will point to Jat being the only one to predict C9 in this series, but even in Jat's JLXP episode that came out today, he basically said that, like, he just thought the series was closer, but like I think he even said like it's hard to justify predicting um C9 or something like that. I don't remember what the hell he said exactly, but his point being that like everyone should expect EG to win this series, and well, it just didn't happen.
Yeah, I think part of what I think caught EG off guard a little bit, and you kind of saw that throughout the series, was Cloud9 took a very different approach between their series against CLG and the series against EG. And specifically, we obviously have to start with the bot lane because Berserker, I mean, pretty much was smurfing almost the entire series. Cloud9 was putting a lot of eggs in his basket from the get-go, and that was very
Yep.
apparent in almost every single draft. And he delivered basically whenever the opportunity arose. And you saw in the series versus CLG, one of the things that people talked about with Cloud9 in their draft was, well, why are we giving up the Zeri, enchanter pick every single time? And Cloud9 was rather opting into the counters of Zeri, whether that be the Kalista or the Draven, but just some form of an aggressive bot lane. And EG has been known to be picking the late game scalers for Danny, but we kind of just saw the complete opposite of that, where Cloud9 actually opted into the Zeri matchups, often trading the Zeri for the Sivir and Berserker. I mean, it was literally just a highlight reel the whole series.
Yeah, Berserker really did step up. And look, I know a lot of people are going to point to, well, he's playing Zeri and Zeri's broken right now. Like, look, true, but guess what? I will always say this. Any team can pick Zeri, any team can ban Zeri. So if it's on the table, I don't like well, he was just playing this OP pick. No, he's absolutely styling on EG. And obviously, you have to point to EG absolutely choking in this series. It's not like EG played well. But again, you can't take away credit from Cloud9 for looking much, much better. I feel like you could point to every single role, every single player on Cloud9 and say they played better than they had been for almost all of summer.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the only person that you could say wasn't playing any better was Berserker because he's always playing really, really well. And that's part of the reason why I think everybody recognizes how good he is, despite Cloud9 having a pretty lackluster summer for the most part. Like you said right at the beginning, we haven't seen Cloud9 consistently playing good league for multiple weeks. It was, they started off with the 0-3 and then they went, they won 2-0 in their next week. And then the week after they went 1-1 and then another 2-0 and then a 0-2 where they dropped games to CLG and 100 Thieves and looked almost lost towards the end of the regular season. Luckily, keeping enough wins plus the tiebreaker in week 8 to stay at a higher seed in the playoffs. And, not to say that Cloud9's problems are completely going to disappear after the series. It was a 3-1. I mean, they had three very, very good games, but they weren't perfect games by any means. Like this was definitely a very back and forth series, and I find it a bit funny because last week we talked about, what does a 3-1 series actually look like? Is it a close series? Is it a complete stomp? And we were talking about that in reference to the TSM or not the FlyQuest Team Liquid series. It was a 3-1, but it was a 3-1 stomp. Like this was a very close 3-1.
Yeah, it varies, right? Is honestly the answer when it comes to like how series go. Like it changes all the time. And I'm looking for the tweet that okay, here it is. Nessiv, who replied to me in a tweet this weekend, basically saying, "I just hope people don't get overexcited for C9. Like Doublelift said during co-stream, both teams had many unforced errors, and more importantly, EG just crumbled. Still good on C9 to capitalize, but I'm going to remain a healthy skeptic on this one." I couldn't agree any more with that statement. I think that is the perfect way to look at it because you do have to give Cloud9 credit for looking better. But the same thing that I said, I think I said something about TL last week where it was like the reason why I had more faith in 100 Thieves is because TL had just smashed pretty weak opponents generally, right? They had the series against FlyQuest, and FlyQuest didn't look all that good. So it was like, even though TL looked so good against FlyQuest, it was like, let's remember Fly's not playing that well right now. And I think you have to say the same thing about EG this weekend. EG didn't play that well. So I think the skepticism for C9 and C9 fans, totally, totally fair. And they're going to get that test. I mean, let's say they should get that test because I would have thought they got the test this weekend against EG. Let's hope that they get it next weekend against 100 Thieves because, I mean, 100 Thieves did look really, really good. So C9 is probably going to have a really tough opponent next week.
Yeah, and I think one thing that helps put it into context a little bit better is if you can recall EG from last split, they're in a similar position to what C9 is right now. They were a roster who had a lot of potential, but was underachieving, kind of came into the playoffs with, they were kind of a bit of an unknown because you weren't sure if they were going to be able to play consistently at a top level. And when they've showed that level, they've been a really good team, but almost 50% of the time they weren't showing up during the regular season. And throughout the playoffs, when EG ended up dropping to the lower bracket after losing to Team Liquid, you saw them. They went 3-0 after 3-0 after 3-0, looking really, really strong. But the only reason why we're holding on to that spring split and we entered summer split with this idea of this EG dominance is because they did it and made it all the way 3-0ing everybody. So while it's definitely great for Cloud9, and obviously, I'm a Cloud9 fan, so I'm super happy about them making worlds and everything. However, if they want to be looked at as the number one team and they want to be looked at as the best team in the league, they have to continue to do what they just did to EG. It can't just be, okay,
Yeah.
they lose to 100 Thieves and then they lose in the third place match. Like that, that's just not going to leave, the best taste in your mouth come Worlds. So you want
Yeah.
to see, if you're a Cloud9 fan like me, you definitely want to see them have continued success throughout the playoffs, have a competitive series against 100 Thieves. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to beat them, but you can't just drop to 100 and then drop out of the lower bracket, making it and going off to third place. Cloud9 is definitely known for kind of ramping up as the summer playoffs continue, and I think having a dominant 3-1 over the defending champs and the number one seed is definitely a good way to start it off, but they got to keep the train rolling.
Yeah, and I'll get to it. It's easy to just say, well, EG didn't show up. It's like, well, okay, what are you talking about exactly? I'll get to EG in just a second. I want to continue to hammer home the differences that we saw out of Cloud9 this summer versus what we saw this weekend. The two guys I have to point to, I mean, I said they all improved, and I do believe that, but the two guys to me that were most surprising, I guess, were Fudge and Blabber. You mentioned how it wasn't really a surprise that Berserker looked better because he did have a great summer. So it's like, okay. But Fudge, they gave him the counter pick in games 1 and 2, and he just absolutely stomped with it. He looked way, way better than Impact. And I will say that I mentioned not long ago, I don't know if I mentioned it on our show or on Hotline League, but I mentioned the point that, like, I don't think the reason why I thought 100 Thieves is going to be the winner by the end at the end of the day is because I don't see any holes in their lineup, whereas I do see some in EG. Um, Impact is definitely one where it's like, okay, he is not the same Impact that we used to see. He is no longer C9 Impact, no longer TL Impact. EG Impact to me has looked a little bit worse than those two versions of himself, and Fudge absolutely exploited it. The Camille pick, he just absolutely styled on him. He solo killed him with the Fiora as well. Like, what a absolute resurgence from Fudge. And like, if I'm a C9 fan, I'm getting really excited seeing Fudge start to pop off again. Because if you just look back to last year, Fudge was absolutely great in the top lane, and that's what you want to see going into Worlds and the rest of playoffs, of course.
Yeah, I remember right after the series and even watching the co-streams, but reading all the things in the comments on Twitter and Reddit, a lot of people talked about Fudge very highly, but mainly for his late game team fighting and kind of engages and his utility in the later parts of the series on the Sejuani. But to me, kind of like you were mentioning before, like Fudge's strong suit has always been team fighting. However, what made him so much greater than Impact this weekend was his performance in lane, getting multiple solo kills in the Camille and the Fiora games. Obviously, in the Camille game, he was kind of already ahead of the curve a little bit, but a solo kill is still a solo kill nonetheless. And just completely dominated Impact in lane. Impact had almost zero presence in this entire series. The only one play that I can think of where Impact, did anything was when he dove onto Berserker in Game 3 in that really messy fight around it was Rift Herald Baron area. I don't remember if it was Rift or Baron it spawned at the time, but other than one team fight, I don't think you noticed Impact at all this entire series, and that's kind of just credit to Fudge for just completely shutting him down both in lane and in team fights.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And if we're talking still about Impact, there is also the play where he's on Jax, and to me, definitely had the opportunity to stun the Zeri in the fight that was around Dragon. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah, and he's kind of greeting for some autos.
Like, you got to lock down that Zeri and kill that fucking guy. That to me was another area that's just added to the list of chokes, right? And again, I said I will get the EG. I will in just a second. The other guy, Blabber, constantly ready for counter ganks this series. We mentioned how Inspired's supposed to be the guy that's supposed to 1v9 this series. He's been the clear MVP this split. Um, Blabber read him like a book. He counter ganked so many times and swung fights in C9's favor. It was like, this is the Blabber that we've been looking for. And I'll go back to our conversation that we had just a couple of weeks ago, JNT, where we said Blabber was currently the issue, but he's also the solution. That like, if he starts going again, C9 is going to be a threat. Well, he did, and they are. So big shout out to Blabber.
Yeah, I think the only other, I mean, I guess the only place we haven't really covered is mid lane, but it definitely felt like the mid lane matchup was, I mean, you could see Jensen's experience just kind of shine throughout the entire series.
Hmm.
Um, Mainly in just, I thought the laning. I didn't think that JoJo's laning has been the best part of his game, in my opinion. From everything
Hmm.
that I've seen from spring and summer, he isn't the
Yep.
one to, be putting the team on his back and to be doing all the carrying in the late game. Like that's kind of reserved for Inspired and Danny, but that's not necessarily his role. But JoJo's play in lane has always been top tier and has always allowed Inspired the freedom to pretty much do whatever he wants. And I think you can kind of just see Jensen, for the most part, getting the better of him in lane in every single game. I mean, I don't have the numbers set in front of me, but it felt like Jensen had a 10 to 15 CS lead in almost every single game come, 14 minutes. And, you could kind of see, especially in game one with the Oriana versus Azir matchup, like Cloud9 was just ahead on almost every single play, and was doing a good job of punishing EG's overextension, specifically that one top fight where EG kind of goes for this weird fight with no ultimates up, and you see Cloud9 is, there first with Jensen and Sven to punish. He gets a two-man shockwave, just kind of that's where the game ended because then the Fudge solo kill happened. But I think definitely looking back on the series, mid lane was so hard in Jensen's favor, and JoJo, similar to Inspired, couldn't do almost anything because Cloud9 was just kind of choking the life out of them in the early game.
Yeah, and I don't even know if, in fact, Jensen did have CS leads, but I do agree with you regardless because I do think that, well, JoJo was dying a lot in lane, which is like, that's not what you want to see. If we mention that his strength is in lane, you can't be dying in lane that often, right? And I think you got to give credit to Blabber and Jensen for one, having the lane set up for a gank, but two, also being able to execute the gank from Blabber's perspective. So I do think that they teamed up really well together to be the better jungle mid and ultimately win mid lane through the duo versus duo matchup more than it was just Jensen beating JoJo. But I mean, on top of that, again, I said I was going to get the EG. There's lots of areas you could point to for them choking. Right, there is JoJo dying in lane many times. There is him shuffling in on Azir many times and just shuffling nothing. There's Inspired missing the smite in game 4. Like C9 ends up getting soul because of that. Like that's something that really, really cost him later on. And like, there's no reason to smite early, right? A lot of times junglers are unfairly blamed for smiting. That one is on the jungler and no one else. Like Inspired needs to not smite early, and it's honestly just that simple. Then later on, you could even point to where he smites Scuttle right in front of C9, and they're like, "Hey guys, you guys want to finish drag? They have no smite." So like a couple of hiccups out of Inspired as well. Danny, how many arcane shifts in is he going to do with before he realized that he's going to get punished for doing that? Just chokes all over the map. I can even point to Vulcan. Vulcan starting his Yumi ulti in the one team fight before Inspired is even going in. He Yumi ults nothing. And this is around Herald in the river. And so you could point to everyone on this roster and say that at some point they made a play that is just absolutely choking, and that is not what we've come to see out of EG. And so now it's looking like EG had everything going for themselves since what, I don't know, since like April, maybe even March. And it seems to be all coming apart at the worst possible time. And they're going to run out of time. Well, let's not say they're going to run out of time. They are running out of time to fix what was a disaster of a weekend.
Yeah, part of the difficulties of being the number one team in a league, regardless of its regular season, playoffs, whatever. But when you are that number one team, the pressure is kind of on your back, and it's especially in this situation, Cloud9. I would say entering playoffs probably isn't or wasn't one of the favorites to be at the World Championship because everyone else would have pegged, EG 100 Thieves and Team Liquid ahead of them. I mean, myself
I
included.
certainly did. Yep.
I don't okay, I guess what I will say is I don't think I had TL on the same level as you did with 100 Thieves and EG, but I definitely didn't see Cloud9 ahead of TL by any means, or Cloud9
Yeah.
ahead of either of EG or 100 Thieves. Like as a biased fan, I can't even say that. But it definitely seemed like the pressure was getting to EG. Small mechanical misplays. Even their whole identity was completely different. I mean, if we do want to get a little bit more into the EG side of things, kind of something that I said at the start, and you heard it in an inspired interview, was that the game plan out of Cloud9, it kind of threw them off guard. And I think you kind of saw EG getting put on some uncomfortable picks. Like it didn't really seem that Inspired knew what to do on the Sejuani as much as Blabber. I know Blabber only played it the one game, Inspired played it the two games, but it just felt like a pick he wasn't very comfortable on. And honestly, the Sejuani flex to jungle is something that I thought we were going to see more with Poppy, with where Poppy became a really predominant jungler, and I was like, this pick can easily go top lane, and it's great into a lot of the matchups. And we're seeing that with Sejuani now, kind of flipping from top now over to jungle, and we're seeing it actually be a very powerful flex pick in these drafts in playoffs. And it just seemed like EG was kind of outthinking and outsmarting themselves with, picking up this Sejuani an early priority after Blabber just won on it in game one, and then Inspired just didn't look very comfortable on it, and they had impact on these more carry top laners than, utility engage, which is pretty much what he's been doing on his entire time with EG, is the more utility engage role. I know that Impact does have some pretty good games on some carries at points, but we just haven't seen that with EG, and didn't necessarily have the best Jax game, had a pretty horrible Aatrox game as well. So just
Yeah,
everything just seemed out of whack for EG.
yeah, couple of points I want to hit on there. One is the Inspired interview, but first I do want to get to the Impact thing. It's like, even if Impact is no longer, in my opinion, like I said, no longer to the level of TL Impact or C9 Impact, you need him to at least be solid, and he wasn't, right? You can't be a hole in the lineup. And I honestly don't think he's been a hole in the lineup all summer long, but he definitely was this weekend, and that's a problem because, I mean, when you have impact on your lineup, you're expecting, like, that's a guy you're expecting to be one of the least of your problems to even consider, especially when you have a bunch of rookies on your team. And it feels like EG has a bunch of fires to put out all of a sudden, whereas they wouldn't have had any even just a week ago. To the Inspired thing, I want to get to that interview because there was a lot of people that didn't like the interview from Inspired, speaking so, I don't know, just honestly, I guess. I personally didn't have any problems with the interview. I suppose I shouldn't say I do have a small problem. a lot of the things that he said were true, and he's just saying like we didn't draft properly here, and we don't have players that play these champions, or whatever it is. And I think that's totally fair to call out. The place where there's some criticism is that there was some definite faults from his game in this series, and we already laid them out, and no mention of that. And I think that's where, like, I think he mentioned something about the drag getting stolen, and it's like, dude, two of those dragons are not stolen. One of them you wasted smite in front of C9. The other one you just wasted. Well, I guess both of them you wasted smite in front of C9 if you really think about it, um, just in different ways. So like that's the only area where it's like, maybe got to look in the mirror a little bit. But as far as the criticism towards his teammates or his coaching staff or just whoever is in charge of draft, I don't think there's anything wrong as long as he's not just putting all of the blame on their shoulders specifically. I think if in the interview you say what went wrong in a series and you tell him what went wrong, that's okay. And I think he even mentioned in that interview that like he's going to have to figure out how to help his teammates overcome this loss or something. I don't remember direct quotes. But I do remember him saying like we need to figure out something, so like he needs to help his teammates or something like that. And so to me, I didn't really have too many problems with the interview. What did you think, Jinter?
I mean, it's always difficult when you interview a player right after a loss because
True.
they're not going to see the full picture, just because what he would have gotten out of the series 15 minutes ago.
Yeah, there's
And
so much going through your head at that time,
you
right?
know, even when he's, watching the games himself, regardless of the very obvious mistakes when it came to the smiting and everything, he's not going to recognize all the individual mistakes that he would have made throughout the entirety of the game because, you're
Yeah.
not thinking about it right then.
True.
It's just natural for people to sort of, I don't want to say blame others because I don't think he was necessarily blaming, but it's kind of just a natural instinct to deflect a little bit when you're kind of reflecting on your own play, and that's part of the reason why you always see players and teams in any of these like behind the scenes videos. They always talk about like we're going to review the games later because we
Yeah.
want to decompress right now when you want to review it later because when you do it in the moment you're probably going to be pretty emotional about it. So I really didn't have a
Yeah.
problem with it. Obviously it's understandable for people to be a little bit upset that he was criticizing his teammates more of his own play. But I mean, I don't really hold a whole lot of weight to it. He's the carry of the team, so I expect him to be someone who is going to be critical of both himself and of his teammates because how can you, improve and be better as a team if you're not critical of each other? So
Yeah. I
I see no
100%
wrong
agree.
with it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, nothing else for me. Is there anything else that you had on this series?
I mean, yeah, I guess the last thing I want to say is I don't really I find it difficult to talk really about the bot lane of EG because I don't think they did a whole lot wrong this series. They were kind of just doing as well as they could in the laning phase, but when it came to team fights, just COULDN was just out team fighting them. And you know, I didn't really. I guess to say I wasn't really expecting Danny or Vulcan to win that matchup per se. I think Berserker is really really good, and I think they're relatively even with EG's bot lane. I just think that the better team won, and oftentimes when the better team is winning, the enemy AD carry is just naturally going to look and do better than the losing AD
That's
carry.
true.
And
That is definitely
in
true.
the one Evil Geniuses win, the Ezreal, was it Ezreal Seraphine that they ran bot lane, or no, sorry, Seraphine Senna. Danny had a really good game on that. So
Yeah.
I have no fault to EG's bot lane. I just think that the trio of Fudge, Inspired, and Jensen, sorry, Fudge, Blabber, and Jensen were much much better than the trio of Impact, Inspired, and JoJo.
I think you're right on. Obviously, that doesn't mean EG's bot lane was without mistakes, but when you think about the big mistakes and the reason why they lost this series, it's not just because Danny used a couple of arcane shifts in the wrong way. Like mostly on the top side of the map, I would have to agree with that. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yep.
Before we go on to 100 Thieves and TL, I do want to remind people hit the subscribe button and the like buttons. Uh, for those that wonder just how much that does help us, go look at our last, like, I don't know, what would you say, JT, month or maybe a month and a half, couple of months of videos, and just look at the view count. Look, we know that we are small creators and we have a small but loyal like following or whatever, but you guys can see the difference when you guys hit the subscribe button and hit the like buttons. We've actually kind of like doubled our viewership in the last, I don't know, sometime this summer split. So please actually do, if you're enjoying the content, do subscribe, do hit the like button, do comment. That stuff actually helps us a lot. clearly as shown in the last month or so. And for all of our new viewers, we appreciate having you guys. And just so you know, we are available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Of course, YouTube, which is probably where you find us. So be sure to check us out on all those platforms. We make ourselves available, and the episodes come out on those platforms pretty much Tuesday morning every week. So yeah. Okay, Jinter.
Yep.
100T TL banger series. Definitely my favorite series of probably the year. Is that fair to say? It
Yeah, I
has to be.
mean, a lot of the spring series were kind of like stomps, so
Yeah, it has to be. Like it even besides those series in spring being stomps, this series was so good. I tweeted out, and I swear to God, this was totally true. I was actually getting lightheaded from the team fights. Like I was just going crazy, and I stood up too quick out of hype, and then I was like, "Holy shit! I gotta sit down." I am not exaggerating at all. Crazy series.
yeah, definitely. I mean, we've talked about this in the past. We're not, the both of us are not necessarily ones to jump to the draft and, talk about how the draft is what won or lost these teams the game. But it
But
felt like in this series, whichever team got their preferred picks was going to win the game. And I think you really saw that. I guess maybe we'll just start here, but I don't want to jump too far down the line here. But TL was looking really lost after the first two games. I mean, like, people were thinking 0-3 stomp, like TL is about to crash and burn. And this was obviously before the Cloud9 EG series, so TL dropping to the lower bracket, I mean, wasn't necessarily, at the forefront of people's minds saying like, oh my God, if TL drops a lower bracket, they're so doomed. But they were not looking good at all. We're getting stomped almost two games in a row. But Game 3, they get the Zillion pick. Game 4, they get the Senna Swain pick, which is pretty much the two things that we talked about in last week's episode, saying, watch out for these TL picks. If they pick this, they're probably going to win the game. And it was just kind of when TL got their preferred picks, they looked really, really good. But other than that, TL was looking really not so good. Like you take away games 3 and 4, and you only look at games 1, 2, and 5, which I mean, come on, it's kind of bullshit. Like only look at their losses, don't look at their wins. But in their losses, they were looking lost.
dude, let's just start with game 1 even. They didn't get a kill, man.
Yeah.
That is hella like Monka s. Like that that really made me worried because coming into this weekend, as I've said many times and I will say again, to me it was very clear that our top 3 teams were EG, TL, and 100, and those are the 3 teams that are going to go to Worlds. And I felt so confident, and then I was like, "Uh-oh." And it wasn't uh-oh because like if TL doesn't go, then somebody else has to go. It's because those are the only 3 teams that I saw as being like World's quality. And then when I saw that, I was like, oh crap, man, this is not going to be good. But they did manage to bring it back in the other series. And I guess from the side of TL, where I want to point to as like top performers, Bjergsen and Bwipo, I thought were absolute monsters. You mentioned the Swain, even the Zillion. How many times have we talked about Bjergsen Zillion? Like so clutch. uh yeah, to me, I was really impressed with those two as far as like picking up TL's wins. I thought it was those guys taking their pocket picks and putting the team on their back. Even if you still can give credit to the other players on TL, which I think you should, those were the two standouts to me where I was like, oh my God. The one team fight, I don't remember what game it was in. I want to say game 3, where the team fight looks lost for TL, but then Bjergsen lands the double bomb to clean it up at the very end. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I mean, it would have to be game 3 if we're talking about Zillion.
Oh, okay, there you go. Then yeah, game 3. That's just a classic Bjergsen moment where like the fight looks lost, Bjergsen cleans it up, and everything's fine. It was like, oh my God, what a throwback.
Yeah. I was gonna say something, but I just completely like forgot what it was. Um,
Sorry, did I throw you off? We were talking about. I mentioned Bjergsen. I mentioned Bwipo.
oh
What
well,
else were we saying?
well, I guess it was a little before that, but it was just more to the point of, I mean, we talked about TL, and I think everybody recognizes that their early game is probably the best in the league, and their mid to late game team fighting's not so good. However, for the most part, I don't think people really had this scenario in their heads that, oh, what if we lose the early game? Because that's sort of what it felt like in games 1 and 2, where TL just wasn't winning the early game, and 100 Thieves was making the more active plays. I mean, they did the 100 Thieves classic of sending going top lane at level 4, sending 4 people. They brought up Hui and Closer to dive. I think it was like 4v1 basically, and Santorum was like farming his Krugs or something, but 100T is faster to the play. TL really gets on the back foot in the early game, in game 1 specifically, and you just see it's basically a wash where TL has no control or prio in the game whatsoever. Game 2 was a little bit better because you kind of saw Team Liquid matching the cross maps a little bit. They had a pretty good dive bot lane where like Bwipo, Santorin, and Bjergsen kill Someday on a stacked wave, and then they also kill Senna, like kind of like isolated. I don't remember where, but even in the game 2, once 100 Thieves took hold of the lead, they just ran away with it.
Yeah, so game 2, that was the one where TL they jumped out to a pretty decent lead, right? And then there was the classic 100 Thieves just hangs on because they have Seraphine.
Yeah, I mean and
Yeah,
it wasn't even that big of a lead. It was one of these more normal leads that we talk about when it comes to Team Liquid. Like they got their they got 1 to 2K, but
yeah. Which is a
The Senna
fair lead,
Seraphine's
right? Like that's
yeah.
good, but you need more against the right, like against the Senna Seraphine, you need more.
But part of the thing that we were talking about with last week was TL had these almost unthrowable leads in the early game when they were getting 5, 6, 7K ahead, and we both said
Yeah,
that those aren't going to be easily replicated against the better teams, and that's what I
right.
think was most interesting. Where even in a game where TL can get a 2,000 gold lead at around 14 minutes, 100T was by far and away the better team fighting team for the majority of this series. I know
Yes.
that games 3 and 4, were definitely more TL favored, and definitely, they showed better team fighting, but at the same time, they kind of had like their pocket picks in those 2 games. Obviously, one being the Zillion, but the other one being the Swain Seraphine. The Swain Seraphine just seems really, really strong. I don't know how you really counter that strat because both of the champions are just meta picks in general. It's not like some weird tandem of champions that just gets thrown in that nobody's ever seen before. Like Swain is already a good mid laner. Seraphine is a triple flex champion, and I don't really know what you do to deal with that because the comp just looks way too strong.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to your 100 Thieves team fighting thing here, and I'm gonna flex here because, well, as people that listen to us very often know, we always flex the W's and we own the L's, as I did at the start of the episode. This time I'm flexing here because I said last week that I think people sleep on 100 Thieves team fighting a lot, and that I would put them right up there with EG's team fighting, and they freaking proved that this weekend, man. Their team fighting was so good. And I remember now in game 2, the Olaf is running down like the Seraphine or whoever, and who he lines up the Seraphine ult perfect to clip TL's backline. And 100 Thieves, they say, instead of trying to peel an Olaf, which you can't do, why don't we just go for their backline and melt them first, which is exactly what Closer did on the Wukong. They landed the Seraphine ult on the backline, and Wukong just hopped on them and it erased them before Olaf could erase the backline of 100 Thieves. And that's something that 100T understands so well, is not to panic when someone on your team is about to get caught, quote unquote, but to realize the way we win is we erase their backline quicker. And that's where you got to give so much credit to 100 Thieves. Their team fighting is amazing, and they showed it this weekend.
Um, I guess kind of to flip over, talk about the TL side of things a little bit more, because the other player that I think people were not necessarily pointing the finger towards, but obviously wasn't looking very, very good, and Core JJ, I think it's kind
Yep.
of night
I
and
knew where
day.
you were going with it. You didn't even need to say his name, and I knew where you were going with it. And I think that itself speaks to how much people are pointing the finger.
Yeah, and I mean, Double O Sneaky Meteos, they even talked about it on the co-streams, but I think it's kind of becoming a sentiment around the league a little bit is when Core JJ is not on these dynamic playmakers, he's not the same Core JJ that he is. Because when you have him on the Nautilus, you have him on the Leona, you have him on the Thresh, you have him on the Rakan, those 2 champions aren't obviously very viable right now in the meta, but when you put him on the Enchanters, the Nami Lucian, the Yumi, the Lulu, he just doesn't have that same impact within the game as he does on these playmakers. And, obviously he's still a very, very good player. And when he can get his hands on these Enchanters that has a very, is a lane dominant, like for example, a Nami Lucian, maybe a Sivir Lulu, something like that, the advantages that they accrue in lane just aren't comparable to the ones that they can get with engagers. And kind of saw that was missing in the entire series against 100D, except for games 3 and 4, where you saw a little bit of Core JJ getting out of his lane, roaming, making some plays, and has that go button for TL to start these fights. Because when they don't have this go button, it does look a bit sloppy. Their team fighting.
And a little bit of copium, perhaps, for TL fans. I know we've done a lot of that this summer, but imagine what the team looks like when Core JJ is MVP Core JJ. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to get that for sure. We don't know. But I guess what I'm saying is this team looks good, maybe not amazing, but they look good. And there's still obvious room for improvement, right? Because we know that Core JJ has not been at his best. So I guess what I'm saying is if he manages to find his game, this team is looking really, really good. They're just, again, running out of time, right? They can't lose anymore or else they're done. So there's that. The obvious play to point to is where he's basing, I think it was Yumi. He's basing
Yeah,
on
it's
Yumi
game
and just
two, I
gets caught.
believe.
Like that was costly because then you have a team fight that breaks out right after. And I'm watching that team fight going, I think they win this with a Yumi, but I mean, you never know. But I feel like they probably win that fight with the Yumi, and they didn't have it. And so you gotta wonder, like, hey, is Core JJ costing his team some team fights and ultimately some games? And I think in that scenario, yeah, maybe. Now, you could probably argue that maybe 100 Thieves doesn't even start up the Baron, and so the fight never happens if he doesn't get caught. Regardless, things really swung in the way of 100 Thieves after Core JJ gets caught there, and you cannot be getting caught basing in really lazy spots, let's say.
Yeah,
The other thing too on that play, what was really unlucky is Bwippo's pushing bot. He bases, then TPs into the fight, but like Core JJ was spawning in like 3 or 4 seconds or something. And if I'm not mistaken, you can TP with the Olaf, right? Can Yumi attach to the Olaf and take the TP?
I feel like they removed that mechanic.
I
That
was wondering if they
that
removed it
you
as well.
I don't think that's a
You
mechanic
can
anymore.
base with the Yumi, but you can't TP with the Yumi. Is that how it works?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, all right. Never mind then. Never mind. But I did notice that, and I wanted to ask you that, J&T. I just forgot.
I'm not even sure. Yumi's an abomination, so like, does it even matter?
Yeah.
I feel
Speaking of
like this
abomination, should we talk?
playoffs. Well, I just feel like this playoffs, like everybody's just talking about Yumi because she's such a meta champion right now. She's pretty much 100% presence, pick ban, whether it gets banned out or picked, B1. I don't
Well,
think
what about
anybody.
Seraphine though?
Well, but just it does feel like there's a little bit more counterplay with that champion. Obviously, I think the pick is just really strong in general, especially when you pair it with the Senna and the bot lane. That's when I think it's at its strongest. Um, or I guess if it's in this sort of the Swain Seraphine comp. But I mean, Yumi's just that champion is so disgusting.
It
Please
is
remove.
weird
Please
because I think
remove.
you're right. Like I think you're right as far as like there does feel to be some counterplay around Seraphine, whereas like Yumi there doesn't. It's hard to say honestly because it's weird because I actually do think Seraphine is the better champion right now. But there's counterplay to her when there's not. Honestly, even the counterplay to Seraphine is pretty limited though. Like you have to one shot her, or she's just gonna heal everything. Like, okay, well,
Well, I mean, that okay, but here's the thing. That's acceptable, but it's not with Yumi because you can't kill her because she sat on
yeah,
top of somebody. Like there's a ton of
yeah.
champions in the game where if you don't kill her, she's gonna out heal you. Like that's what a lot of the enchanters are doing right now. Soraka, that's like,
No,
obviously
I'm
they
with
don't.
you. I agree about the counterplay point. I'm with you. I
Yeah,
am.
goddamn, we're still talking. Like God, Yumi, get out of here. Stop
Let's talk about
infiltrating my
something
mind.
else. Let me talk about Closer, okay? Because
That
that
guy's a
guy's a
beast.
monster, dude. I. The thing is too. So as I was watching, I really wish I could watch the broadcast with someone this weekend. I know I've said that to you a million times, but I had to watch it by myself because for reasons. Um, and I saw, as people obviously pointed out or noticed during the broadcast, you see Reaper like tapping Closer on the chest, kind of like a "you got this" kind of thing, and then they lock in the Lee Sin for Game 5, and I was like, "Oh, that's why! It's because they know that that Closer is going to absolutely be a monster on Lee Sin, and he's going to send them to the winners finals," and he absolutely did. This is not the first time we've seen Closer's Lee Sin. In fact, we even have a thumbnail dedicated to it like 3 or 4 months ago from an episode sometime back in spring. And we literally could have copied and pasted that thumbnail. Just Closer 1v9 is Lee Sin carrying the game, dude. So clutch, man. I don't know what else to say. He is clutch, and there's nothing more to it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember saying last week if Inspired wasn't having the clear like MVP season that he is, Closer is probably winning MVP in his first team All Pro Jungle this season because he's been having such a good season, and I think that was part of the reason why Jungle was kind of a weird 1-2-3, and with Inspired Closer and Santorin. I think any of those three junglers at any given time of the league this year has been, number one. And I think you really saw this weekend, both in the, when you compare this game 5, TL 100 Thieves, to the game 4 of C9 versus EG, you kind of saw like Closer's clutch factor there. Really had the guts to blind pick his Lee Sin. I mean, did they blind pick it? I don't remember, but I thought they were blue side and picked it 4-5,
I
right?
don't know.
I don't,
I
I
don't
don't
know.
recall if they blind picked it, but either way, like when Lee Sin's not a champion that's been in the meta for very long, I mean, obviously he's practiced it a lot because he's played it a lot, but to bring it out in a high pressure game 5 scenario is always just pretty awesome.
Well, I think he said in one of his interviews that like he hadn't even played it in 3 months or something like that, so that he was a little nervous or something like that. Maybe
A
someone could fact check me if they do remember what he
baller.
said in the post game interview, but I'm pretty sure he said something like that.
I mean, yeah, the guy's a beast. There's not too much to say about it. Obviously, the other player I think to talk about with 100 Thieves in this series is Someday. Pretty much got the better of Whippo throughout the entire series. The only one game that really sticks out in my mind is Game 3. Was where Whippo ran the Urgot back, and TL kind of had a much better comp around it and a much more stable early game, so you kind of saw the value of that pick shine.
Yeah.
But in all other of the 4 games, Someday was clearly the better player in lane.
I thought that
And
both top laners actually had good series, honestly. To be honest, I thought they actually both looked really good. And yes, someday had the game where he was kind of getting clapped a little bit, but like I don't know. That's just what's going to happen when you have two top laners that are playing very aggressive and are both looking to carry. You see kind of one of them come out on top. Like to me, that didn't really stop me from thinking either top laner had a good series.
yeah, I mean, I don't think Bobo had a bad series. I just think Someday was clearly the better player. And
Yeah.
like I said at the beginning, in a world where TL is not smashing their lanes and getting those natural early game leads, which they're very accustomed to, it's very interesting to see how different their gameplay is from an even game state or a behind game state to up 3, 4, 5,000 gold, because it just seems very, very different. Just the level of confidence and commitment from them is just completely flipped. And going into the lower bracket, they're obviously not too pleased about EG being down there, thanks to Cloud9, and probably makes the
Uh-oh.
presumed world spot on the line between TL and EG very, very exciting.
Yeah, it is. Uh-oh, I don't know what else to say because I really wanted both those teams to go. Only one can go now. I want to get back to the closer thing because I think when you have a player that continues to be this clutch, I think it's time you start considering him on that list that came out not too long ago of the top 5 LCS junglers. Look, Closer has not been around the LCS for that long, but since coming to the LCS, he has continuously been one of the best junglers and maybe the most clutch. That could probably be argued a little bit with him and Blabber, and maybe there's another name to
I
throw
was
in
gonna
there.
say
Maybe Sin.
Xmithy, the Smite
Pardon me?
God. Xmithy, the Smite God.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was talking about since Closer play. How long has it been since Smithy's been in the league? Did he play once?
Then
One
9.
split? So that was that even after
Or
closer?
he
Or was
might have
that
no, he
before?
might have been on. Well, Closer came season 9, I think, right?
Anyways, I'm talking about since he came into the league, he's been one of the most clutch junglers, maybe the most
Yes, yeah.
clutch jungler. And so I do think that if these lists get revised after a playoff like this, assuming that he continues to play like this, because I mean it could happen to anyone. We saw what happened to EG; it could just fall off a cliff all of a sudden. But if he continues to play like this, I don't see how you keep him off of a top 5 list for junglers. Seeing as I think he's been in the league 3 years now. I think this is his third. Um, and he's been clutch pretty much the whole time, honestly. So yeah,
Yeah,
I
he,
think
he's he's been a
there's
top
some
tier jungler since he
consideration.
arrived.
Yeah, there's some consideration to put him in top 5 junglers. And honestly, let's say he did it for another year or two, maybe even top jungler. Getting ahead of myself here, but that's kind of the path that he's on right now because he has been really, really clutch. And I promise I'll stop now.
Okay. Well, think we are we good to move on?
Just a little bit of criticism I want to sprinkle in there. I mentioned how who he was really good at landing the Seraphine ultis, even when he's getting engaged on, he would send it through like the Olaf, for example, or through the Xin Zhao or whatever the hell it was, to hit the backline of TL. A lot of clutch stuff there, but his pathing was not particularly the greatest on the Seraphine. Got caught out a couple of times, and that's stuff that like he got away with it in this series because ultimately they got the win, but that's something you can't do going forward a lot. Like that's something that he's going to have to keep his eye on his pathing. When he's pathing alone through the enemy jungle, that's something you can't do a lot. So just a little bit of, I don't know, criticism, I guess. But yeah.
Well, speaking of criticism, let's move on to this Golden Guardian CLG series because I mean, I don't know. It
Bruh.
was it was a mess. I don't even know what to say. Like this was It's funny because you look at the first two games in the lower bracket compared to the two games in the upper bracket, and the level of gameplay was just completely night and day. And I think that was
Yes.
something that I was a little surprised specifically in this series with CLG versus Golden Guardians because CLG, while also a messy series against Cloud9, much, much, much higher level of opponent in Cloud9 compared to Golden Guardians. And honestly, I think, if I recall correctly, we both predicted the 3-0. I mean, maybe one of us
Why
predicted
wouldn't you?
3-1, but this was just a close series for what seemed to be no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, like why wouldn't you predict a CLG 3-0 here?
Uh, I mean, it was a banger.
I don't. Yeah, right. Like, yeah, I don't.
I don't even know what to say.
Yeah. Um, they both looked really bad. Now, let's just say what it is, right? It looked really bad, but I don't. I enjoyed those series. I absolutely loved them. JNT, are you able to admit that you enjoyed them or no because they were lower bracket
No,
and
I
you don't
mean
like that?
they were fun series, but I guess what I'm trying to say is if you want to get excited for a TSM or for a CLG making their lower bracket miracle run, it's not necessarily the best thing to
Yeah.
see what this to see the series that they just played, and also looking to the schedule next week where you're playing one of EG or Team Liquid, a perceived top two of the top three teams in the league.
I'm gonna start with So I agree. I'm gonna start with Golden Guardians. I think they looked bad pretty much everywhere except their bot lane. Um, Sticks it. We mentioned earlier how like Berserker was absolutely styling on the Zeri, and like a lot of people will point to, well, he's playing Zeri, and it's like, no, you still have to give credit. Same thing with Stixay. I don't care that he was playing Zeri. He actually looked really, really good on it, especially when you look at the team that he had to work with versus what Berserker had to work with, night and day. Licorice had maybe one good game this series. I think he had a good Poppy game.
Yeah, his Poppy top game
Uh,
was good.
yeah, the rest was pretty bad. River, honestly, River's supposed to be a good jungler. Not this series. Nope,
Yeah, his Draven game was his only like half decent game.
not at all. And I
The
think
second
Olive
Draven game, I
might
mean.
have had the worst performance of a best of five that we've seen this year. Um, I don't know. Like, look, okay, Olive wasn't having the greatest year to begin with. This was a disaster of a series, man. I, I don't know what to say. Like it feels like he's completely lost game sense. There's the one play where like Contracts is invading and he goes to rotate over as Lissandra and like Contracts has to walk through him to leave. But he still uses the Lissandra claw to like go at him and ends up messing up the combo. It's like you don't need to use that at all and like that is very gold-esque. Like that is gold solo queue
Cool.
to waste your ability to gap close when the guy already has to come through you in the first place. Like I could not believe just I know that's such like a little thing, but it's not as far as like just understanding how the game works. It was like he completely lost game sense and I was really disappointed in Olive's performance.
I think part of the reason why just this Golden Guardians roster just seems to be so out of sync is not even them necessarily being a bad team, but the individuals on this team just continue to underperform. And I feel like when you want to talk about bad teams, we talk about, maybe a Dignitas, we talk about an Immortals, and it's more that, you know, they're just their individual play is okay, but their team and their team fighting is nothing to be know, looked at. But with Golden Guardians, it's just the complete opposite, where it feels like whenever this team is put in potentially, good scenarios within a game, whether they're up 4, 5, 6K gold, they seem to, for the most part, have a good understanding of how to snowball and close out games. But the problem is the individuals just continue to underperform on a weekly basis. I mean, we talked about the drop off of Licorice like 2 weeks ago. That guy does not look like he belongs in the LCS. I mean,
Not at all.
he gave a bit of a like he also did an interview like right after he had lost, and he talked about wanting to come back and play next year. It's like, I'm sorry bro, like I don't even know if you're going to get like starting spots like
I would be
offered to you.
surprised. I'd be very surprised,
And
honestly.
similar with the Blaze Olive, he's been kind of a staple for Golden Guardians for the last couple of years now, but the play is just completely dropped off of a cliff. River, while I don't think that anybody was expecting him to come in and just save the team and look godly all of a sudden, but he also doesn't look very good. I know jungle is a very team-oriented role, and when you're not on a good team, it's hard to look good as when you're jungling, but his early game, he was on a bad team on Dignitas, but he still was a good player who was able to show his strengths in the early game. There is nothing to be like literally nothing going on in the early game for Golden Guardians, and the only positives to talk about with this team is their bot lane. Six and Ole feel like to both of us feel a bit underrated.
Yeah, I
Both
would
of
say.
them, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily put them as a top bot lane in the league, but they'd be they'd be right below your Berserker Sven, your Danny Vulcan, your Huhi FBI, and your Core JJ Hansama. Like they'd be right there at number 5, I think. And I think there's
I
not
agree.
any other bot lane that I would really put over them. And I wouldn't say they're miles behind those aforementioned bot lanes who'd be above them. So
And another thing too is we say all the time how difficult it is to look good when you're on a bad team. This is the perfect example. They actually look pretty good and they are on a bad team. This is a perfect example for why this team or why this bot lane actually doesn't deserve to be put with the rest of the lower tier bot lanes because they're actually looking pretty good and on a bad team. That's hard to do, really hard to do. Um, I don't want to dwell too much on this series because even though it was really enjoyable, most of it was a fiesta. So just a couple of plays, I guess that was pun unintended. Just a couple of plays to point out. I think the Elder Dragon dance was one of the longest we have ever seen.
I remember like
Um
watching like a YouTube video where it's like somebody took the time and like just put a stopwatch right when the kind of the dance started and ended. I want to say I don't remember how long it was, but it was like 2.5 minutes or something.
no, it was longer than that.
I mean, I don't remember, but it was just
I think
felt
it was
like
about
way too
4.
long.
I think it was about 4 minutes.
Yeah,
From
well,
what from I
either way,
now yeah,
so
I think it was
long.
about 4 minutes from when I was counting, but I can't say I perfectly was like, "Oh, start time now, or end time now." I think it was about 4 minutes. So that was one that was absolutely insane, which I guess there's a lot to say on it, but I'll stick with just one thing saying like I don't know why River decided to go back on Elder when two of his teammates are like 10% HP and obviously have to base. That to me felt like he was just giving away um giving away the Elder, which that eventually did happen. The other one, which was probably the funniest play of the weekend, shout out to Medios, is when they chase Dokla and then they wind up just giving CLG Hex Tech Soul. They chase him for so long, and Medios pulls out the whose mom did did CLG fuck or something like that. Like whose mom did Dokla fuck on Golden Guardians because they chase so hard. Like you have never seen someone want to kill someone else so bad. That play was freaking hilarious, and I mean, I think those two fights, the Elder Dance we'll call it, and then chasing Dokla, pretty much summed up the series for Golden Guardians. They just looked horrendous all over the place.
Yeah, and I think I feel it does feel like Golden Guardians mistakes, like they're kind of getting doubled down because the meta right now is so much about fighting around objectives, whether that's Dragon, Rift Herald, Baron, even early tower dives. Like while that's kind of a laning focused thing, it is still got to kind of set up the map right in order to do that. And you can see that Golden Guardians almost has no clue what they're doing when it comes to dancing and fighting around objectives when they are contested. I mean, they obviously know when to take them when they're uncontested, but you put them in like the 5v5 street fight in the river, and the longer it goes on, like the more mistakes seem to be making. Like yeah, like you just said, they 5-man chase a Renekton off into a side lane, and they're giving up Hextech Soul. It's just kind of a mess. And I guess maybe okay. We'll get into this now because we'll probably talk about it. We would have talked about it after the FlyQuest series, but I don't want these two lower bracket series being used as an example for why the 8-team playoff bracket is good. Is because oh my god, Golden Guardians the 8th seed is being competitive with CLG the 4th seed, or oh my god, the 7-seeded TSM beat the 6-seeded FlyQuest. Like dude, that is not the point here. The point is having these two extra teams, while they might be able to beat the 4th, 5th, 6th seed, are just they're not even good enough and shouldn't even be here in the first place. I mean, Golden Guardians, yeah, sure, it was a 3-2 and it was I guess you could say a competitive series because it went all 5 games. But you watch the series, dude. Neither of these teams look like they belonged in playoffs. I know CLG, they had a decent series against Cloud9, and they were deservedly the 4th seed, but they did not look like they belonged either.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It was competitive for all the wrong reasons.
Exactly.
I
That's a good way
I
to
don't really
describe it.
have much else. I don't really have much else to say on it. You know my stance. I don't really care whether it's 8 teams or 6 teams. I feel like this is a conversation that has been had many, many times. Whatever. I enjoy the game, so if they want to keep doing it this way, I'll be more than happy to watch. If they want to get rid of 2 teams, I will say whatever, and life will go on for me. So I'm pretty indifferent one way or another, honestly. But that's just me.
Yeah. Anything else to
Anything
say other than this was a
I was
complete
gonna
shit
say, do you have
show?
anything to say on the side of CLG? Because even though like I think CLG also looked pretty bad, I think the most standout plays were from the side of Golden Guardians. So nothing really stood out. I guess Palafox did have a really good Akali game, right? That was an Akali game that he actually kind of styled on them with.
Yeah, I think that
Um,
was, I don't know, was it game 5 or was it game? Yeah, it was game 5, I think.
I think it was game 5. Admittedly, I look, I'll admit I'm having a hard time finding positive things to say about this series. In all honesty,
What it felt
um,
like to me was it was like, I don't even know, like Golden Guardians and CLG were like the two idiots in the playground, and you were just
the
waiting
monkey
for
fight, the
you were just
classic monkey fight
you were
meme.
just
Come
waiting
on,
for one of them to like trip over themselves, and the other team would like win,
yeah.
and that's pretty much what happened. Golden Guardians' shoelaces were tied, and it took them the whole series to figure out that they were tied, and I don't know. Then CLG was like, okay, we have half a brain, so let's just win.
The last little bit of copium that I have, I don't even think I have it anymore. I guess is the point that I'm trying to make. That I had for Golden Guardians was like, even though the River deal didn't really look like it panned out, at least you have a really good jungler going into next year. And he's not looking like a really good jungler anymore. So now you're really wondering how bad, in fact, that deal was that they made with Dignitas. Because not only did they pick him up and the team got worse, but the player individually looks to have gotten much worse. And yes, small sample size. He's only been there like a month or something now, but it's not a good sign when you thought that you at least, at the very least, would have a solid piece going into next season. It doesn't look like it doesn't look like for sure they're going to have that solid piece. Let's put it that way. He'll probably still be there and whatnot, but I do question the decision a lot more now in hindsight.
Well, it's funny because when you look back to last year, at the end of last year for Golden Guardians, there was a little bit of a reason to get excited about this roster because at the end of season 11, they had just recently made a trade in the summer split to get Licorice,
Yep.
and he was performing pretty well after the trade. And
Yep.
Blaze Olive at that time was looking very, very strong,
Yes,
and
he was.
Stixay was also continually looking solid. And Golden Guardians had some things they could build upon, and they brought over Pride Stalker, who was this, I wouldn't say highly touted EU Masters jungler, but he was a pretty decent EU Masters jungler. And then obviously they brought in Ole coming off of retirement, or I mean, it's not a retirement, but a bit of a layoff. And people had Golden Guardians envisioned in maybe the top 6, top 7. That was like probably realistic for them, and for the most part, they were that in both Spring Split and Summer Split, just until the end where they just completely fell off the face of the planet. And now Licorice, huge question mark. Jungle is a huge question mark. Mid lane, huge question mark. And the only place that I have any bit of confidence in this team going forward is should they keep the bot lane of Sixay and Ole. And at the
Yeah.
same time, Golden Guardians is known to go and try to develop these rookies rather than hold on to this veteran talent. And I could see a world where Golden Guardians doesn't retain Stixay and Ole, mainly because they either don't want to keep them or don't want to or want to invest in some younger talent. But it's the only part of their team that's looking any good right now. So
Well, and I know we've kind of basically started it. We always do the post-mortem for when a team gets eliminated, and we've been doing that for the last couple of minutes now. Usually we give a score of 1 to 10 with how happy or how not happy the teams are with the results based off of where they were expected to be before the split start before spring split starts. So basically back in January, how happy would you be with the results now? And for all the reasons that we've laid out, I think you honestly have to give a 1. You mentioned how like even you could just point to spring, like there were problems and they did throw a lot of games, but they got a lot of leads. This was a team that was not far off from being a solid team,
they were
just a
nine and
couple of
nine.
tweaks. Pardon me.
They were 9-9. They looked like
Yeah,
decent. They were a
and
decent
they were
middle of
just
the pack team.
they were a couple of tweaks away from being maybe even one of our better teams because even though they finished 9-9, there were so many games that they should have had and they just threw. And then obviously they just fell off a cliff and look so much worse. And you could probably point to, yeah, I guess every role that's not in the bot lane, right? Whether it be mid, jungle, or top, they all looked worse. Pride Stalker got worse and ended up getting replaced. Licorice looks way worse. Olive looks way worse. And so, as you mentioned, last year coming into this year, like there was a little bit of reason to be excited about the roster, and then they just absolutely flop. They lose their GM because their GM made a trade that didn't go so well. I don't know, like for happiness scale of 1 to 10 with how the season went, I think it has to be a 1.
Yeah, I mean, the only saving grace is their bot lane because their bot lane is good. And
Yeah.
if I was running the show on Golden Guardians, I'd 100% keep that bot lane. So for those reasons, I'd probably give them a 2
Okay.
because like I've said with a lot of these scores, I always like to think of, are there unanswered questions going into the off season, or are the questions that you might have had during the season or at the beginning of the season, have you solved them or have you figured it out a little bit? And I mean, the roster is in shambles except for the bot lane. And I think it's probably 50-50 that they even keep that bot lane. So it's definitely a 1 if they don't keep Stixxay and Ole. And maybe it's a 2 if they keep them. Just because,
No,
once
I think you're
again,
right.
you have something to build off of going into the next year.
I think you're right. I think I'm a little bit too critical giving them the 1 there because I actually do think you make a good point. It's not like you have nothing going into next year. So if it could be worse, then I think maybe you're right. I think the 2 is a little bit more fair. Um, okay, should we get over to FlyQuest and TSM now?
Yep. Another very exciting series because it went to 5
Yeah.
games and it was very back and forth. But once again, you kind of look at this series game by game. And I mean, game 1 was a stomp, game 2 was a stomp. I guess game 2 wasn't really a stomp. Game 3 was a stomp. That where Spica went like 0-10 on Vi or something. I
That
mean,
was rough, man. That was really, really
that was
rough.
the same game where, what's his face? Tactical was on the Draven and threw his lead. I mean, oh my God. Like,
Yeah. I guess I'll say that I'm surprised Tactical came in because like Instinct did not have a good summer split. Like he was pretty much getting, I don't know, destroyed the whole split long. So it's like, why now? Why all of a sudden are you ready to put Tactical back in now?
it
That
was
felt a little
also,
weird to me.
it was just weird that they did it after 1 loss. I mean, they had just
Yeah.
dominated the first game. Sure, they had also kind of gotten dominated in the second game. I mean, it was kind of close. The gold was relatively even until it wasn't. Like, they were winning until they were losing, kind of Scar quote
Ch-
there. But
Chowie had like the in-game interview where he's like, it's nice to be able to do multiple drafts and like kind of painted it as a positive. But we've all seen that before. We know it's not a positive to. It's not like, oh, we got 2 awesome 80 carries. No, you have 2 really bad 80 carries, and you have to decide which one is not worse or which one is not worse. That's like, let's be honest here, right? Now, at the end of the day, he had a pretty good game 5, so you gotta you gotta give that to Tactical. Um, but I don't think the rest of the series he looked all that great.
yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to talk about. This is a series similar to the Cloud9 CLG series from last week, where it's hard to really point out and talk about one specific player who played great because the games were just so different game to game. Like I
Yeah.
said, games 1, 2, and 3 were pretty much stomps. Game 4 and 5 were a little bit closer, but definitely, you had your standout performances from either side, and we're getting massive advantages. Like Jose Dioto had that huge game 3 where, Spica was 0-10 and just kind of running it at that point. But Jose Dioto had a really good, game for the most part with the early game. Similar thing to what Inspired and Closer sort of do, or and Santorin, sorry, where they just gank every single lane and it just works because their laners are winning at the time. But you look at his performances in game 4 and game 5, and super, super lackluster and just really couldn't do almost anything.
Yeah, I start to wonder because so Jose had a rough series. He had a rough playoff, honestly. He fell off a cliff ever since playoff started. I think you could say the same thing about Philip, and it kind of made me start to wonder whether it's just a coincidence. Like, is it a coincidence? Because remember, we talked a lot about how those two actually worked really well together, and Jose would gank top a lot, and they would have a lot of successful leads come out of the top lane because the jungle top duo worked so well together. And I guess what I'm saying is, I don't think it's just a coincidence that once Diodo doesn't look as good, Philip doesn't look as good either. Now, I'm not trying to put all of Philip's mistakes on Jose's shoulders because, well, I mean, we saw the same theme this weekend where Philip was just continuously caught out in a side lane trying to put pressure. We've seen this with many players in the LCS. That's nothing new, but it was like really, really like it stood out a lot. And I guess I'm just saying I don't really think it's a coincidence that when one struggles, the other struggles as well.
Yeah. And I guess to talk about, I think Spica is the person to point on the TSM side who, within a winning effort, also didn't look very good. Like, I don't think either of the junglers look good in this
Yeah,
series at all. Spica is obviously, I think, supposed to be the strong point of TSM. Him and Maple, for the most part, seemed to really run the show, both during the regular season and this series that we saw in kind of against FlyQuest, but it was kind of more the Maple show rather than Spica and Maple show. I thought Maple had a really good series. He'd be kind of the one person that I would point to if I had to pick somebody who was like the best player in this series or was looking consistently really, really good. Because
didn't
almost every
Chime
single,
have a good series too, or am I? I'm
I
trying to
thought
remember now.
he
Dude, the
had that
series feels like forever
he
ago
had
now.
that he had that pretty awful Pike game, which was
Oh
not so
yeah,
great.
okay.
But I mean, yeah, I would think I'd have to pick Maple just in terms of overall standout. But Chime had his moments for sure. I
Yeah,
think if we want to talk about Chime really quickly, he seems to have integrated really well into the LCS. I think a lot of
I
people were
agree.
not expecting this after his days on Golden Guardians and coming into a more dysfunctional TSM. Despite him getting the LCS starting spot, which he probably himself was really happy about, I think everybody was kind of worried for him because he was getting thrown into this very vicious TSM situation where they do not mess around when it comes to flaming, rookie players or just flaming their players in general. And should have should he have put together like a string of bad performances, probably could have seen him like getting subbed out again or, not even on TSM in the near future. But he seems like a player who can make an impact in this league and actually has some potential, despite him having two pretty terrible ADCs.
Yeah, here's the thing with TSM, right? Going into next season, there's a chance that they just buy all new players because it's TSM and they still have money, even though things haven't gone their way this whole year, pretty much. They still have money, right? So there's a chance that he's not their starter. I do hope they keep him as at least an academy support because I do think he has shown some promising signs, honestly. So that's one thing. Another area where, like, okay, again, this series was also not the cleanest, but there was an area that I thought TSM looked pretty smart, I guess. FlyQuest continued over and over again to just fight everything. And eventually, I believe TSM started to get a read on this. In game 5, they go over to Herald and say, look, if we know FlyQuest is just going to contest everything and fight all the time, why don't we pull off this thing since we have the whole area swept anyways and just wait for them to come to us and hard engage on them and punish them? And that's exactly what they did. So that was one area in game 5 where I went, I know exactly why TSM pulled off Herald because it didn't look like they were hard pressured to pull off of Herald, but it was still the right play to do it anyways because they knew exactly, they read FlyQuest like a book. And that goes to show that sometimes you can't just repeat the same thing. You need to be a little bit unpredictable in this game. And well, they weren't. TSM predicted exactly what they did and punished them. And that's ultimately what swung the series, in my opinion, in their favor. Because I think FlyQuest had a little bit of a lead in that one. Maybe I'm confusing it with a different game, but regardless, that was what swung the series in their favor was pulling off Herald, saying we know they're going to come fight us, and they punished them. So kudos.
Yeah, I think another reason why I think we kind of saw this series go TSM's way, while it was also, I think, them getting a read on FlyQuest throughout the series and making the proper adjustments. I think the other part of it was Aframu's kind of inability to play the meta. And I know he's obviously been known his entire career for his engagers, and that's always been when he's at his best in the LCS is when these engaged champions are meta, when he's on the Nautilus, when he's on the Leona, when he's on a Thresh or something like that. And unfortunately, it's just not the meta right now. And I think you kind of saw in both games 4 and 5 him really lack that ability to make plays, even though he's on these playmaking champions. And part of that is because, like you said, TSM had the read on them that they wanted to go for and fight everything. So they knew to bring all the members necessary to Herald and Dragon fights. They knew, FlyQuest is going to look for a fight here. Like, be ready to use your flashes, be ready to disengage. And you kind of saw that with FlyQuest. They just became super, super one-dimensional, especially when the games started to not go in their favor. While it's always hard to talk about these kind of instances in games where teams will kind of continually die and then die again and then die again. And I've always kind of been of the thought that I prefer the team who wants to continue to try and fight back and claw their way back into the game rather than waiting until you're down 8, 9k, Dragon Soul, Baron buff, whatever, and fighting at your base. Because it can look inty sometimes when you, specifically in that game 5, where you kind of just keep dying over and over again. But part of that was because that was really FlyQuest's only option. They didn't really ever have the
Yeah.
scaling option because they had an Engager and not an Enchanter, and you really saw that benefit TSM in a couple of those games, specifically in that game 5 where they had, the sort of the hybrid enchanter and disengage in the Rakan.
I generally agree with you when it comes to the like try to make a play rather than just wait. But I think you would also agree that like it always depends on the different situation, what champions are being played, how the scaling goes for each team. Like the team comps and stuff like that always matter. But in general, I do agree with you. However, it feels like FlyQuest is not a team that's very calculated about like, oh, do we scale better or do they scale better? It really just feels like they just want to fight. And honestly, they continue to contest objectives that they don't have any business contesting, which is why TSM punished them in Game 5. But even earlier than that, in Game 4, I think it was Game 4, Takuya is on Oriana and he's in the top lane farming a wave that is like nowhere near where the fight would break out around Herald. I know it sounds like close because Herald and top are close. They were not close. FlyQuest decides to take the fight, and that was the play where Johnson has like his big outplay. Do you remember? Like he had to like he flashed in with like I think it was red and white guns.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Super.
It was
Was in
that
game
play.
4.
It was that
Yeah.
play, but it's like if you require an outplay like that to get an advantage, that's a little monka. Like you probably shouldn't have taken the fight, but you just had Johnson like absolutely style on them. But not only that, the next team fight, Johnson just gets immediately clapped because he doesn't have flash after that play that he had to use his flash for to pull off. So like even in the long run, they're still even after they win that fight, they're still getting punished for taking fights that they have no business taking even later on. And so I don't know, to me that's just another reason why FlyQuest didn't really deserve to move on. They take fights that aren't calculated. Like they're just not. We're fighting and that's it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the way to play the game.
Definitely not right now. It definitely seems a little more scaling oriented. But
Yeah,
I think, like I was kind of alluding to before, when you do pick the kind of drafts that make your team a little bit one dimensional, you have to go for it. Like if they had picked this draft and they have the Tom Kench, they have Poppy, they have Aatrox, these really early to mid game spiking champions. If they just did nothing and lost the game, I would have been more upset at that than kind of what transpired in that game 4 and 5.
that's CLG of last
Yeah,
year
exactly.
and the year before. This the classic CLG.
Yeah, do nothing and lose.
Damn, don't you hate when the do nothing strat doesn't pay off?
Yeah.
Oh man, it's 2022 summer and we're still flaming CLG from last year. Crazy. Some things never change. The only other one thing that I wanted to point on before we get to our scores, you mentioned how Aframu maybe not playing the most meta stuff right now. I still think that's okay, especially in game 2 where he hooks the Gnar, who has nearly a full Gnar bar. I thought that was really calculated. Like, hey, I don't care if he actually almost has his ulti. We can nuke this guy before he pulls anything off, and so that was an area where you got to give Afro credit because I thought I don't know that's just a clutch play, knowing full well that you can erase that guy before he gnars out and well cleans up your whole team. So
Yeah.
just another little thing where once again I think Afro's a little overlooked by general league population, if you will.
I think in terms of giving them a score for their season so far, I guess not so far because their season's over.
Season's
Um,
over. What's the score? I'm
but
having a hard time with this one.
it's hard to give them a high score, even though they were they're pretty much hovered around sixth for the most part in both spring and summer. I want to say they were also 9-9 in spring split. Obviously, it was different because I remember they had those big three-way tiebreakers between EG, Golden Guardians, and FlyQuest. But in this split, 10-8, lost a tiebreaker to Cloud9 for the 5th seed, so finished 6th again. But it's hard for me to put them maybe over a 6 just because we
They
just
didn't win
saw
a
this.
playoff round.
Yeah, they just faltered and didn't really look competitive at all when it came to the playoffs. Even in Spring Split, I remember they didn't look very solid in the playoffs. And in these two playoff series, sure, you lost 3-1 to Team Liquid. You probably weren't even supposed to be in it to begin with, but it just looked so bad. Games 2, 3, 4 just weren't even close. And then going into the series against TSM, a team who they should beat on paper
Yeah.
100%. Despite TSM being, maybe they have the playoff buff or whatever in the summer split, like that buff doesn't apply to these players, man. Like FlyQuest just played like dog shit.
Yeah, I think I actually give them a 4.
Yeah,
It's
I'd
it's
probably
hard
give them
to
a 5, I
it's
guess.
hard to say because it's always relative to like what the team's expectation is of themselves, right? Like when we did the Golden Guardians one, we mentioned that like this team actually had potential to be really good and then hard tank. I don't know if the FlyQuest potential was ever that high. Um, I remember being pleasantly surprised at the start of this split that they were better than my expectation. But coming in, I did not have a lot of hopes for their roster. In all honesty, I remember. Where did I power rank them? Do you remember?
I think it was towards the bottom, like 8th or
It was
ninth.
like 7 or 8 or
Maybe
something.
it
Yeah,
probably it was 8.
anyway, so like I guess where coming into the split, they kind of ended where I expected them to, but even still in that fashion, the way that it happened was like they kind of gave hope that everything was okay and that everyone was looking pretty good, and then they just suddenly tanked and lost just in maybe just awful fashion in playoffs. They got hard clapped by TL. They went to 5 games against TSM. I don't think that really
Lost.
says anything,
It's
right?
not even it's not even like you were CLG and you went to 5 games, looked terrible, but at least you won. Like you went to 5 games, looked terrible, and you lost.
Yeah, so I guess I give him a 4, but I honestly, it's a really tough one with FlyQuest for me.
Yeah, definitely difficult, but I think kind of as you mentioned at the beginning there, they didn't necessarily have the highest expectations on them, so you can't really punish them too hard
And you know
for
what?
not bringing those results.
Philip is a pleasant surprise as well, and he's a piece that you get to keep going into next year. Like, there's obviously a lot of room for improvement for such a fresh, brand new player. So maybe that's something else to hold on to for FlyQuest fans.
Pretty well, along with the playoff matches this weekend. As you know, last week we did our Rookie of the Year and coaching staff split predictions. Jojo Pune won the Rookie of the Year over Berserker, who was second in voting. I
Was
don't
that
think
what I
they.
predicted?
No, we both picked Berserker, but I think I
No,
said.
but predicted though.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I get what you're saying now. I think we both thought that Jojo was going to win it. Even though we both had the idea that Berserker was going to, or should have won, based on our opinions. But like we kind of said in the past with some MVP and even all pro votings, it's what actually happens isn't necessarily always, the the result that we think should happen.
Yeah, and it wasn't like, oh no, JoJo had a good split too, so like that was
Yeah.
okay with me. I didn't mind that at all. It was just like it should have been one of those two, and that's fine. And even honestly, you could oh never mind, I'm confusing it with something else. Never mind, I was confusing it for most improved player.
Oh.
Um, before we get to that though, the coaching staff CLG won that one.
Hmm.
That was expected.
Yeah, I
Although you
remember.
you didn't
Well,
you didn't give it to CLG
Well, I
though.
remember last week I kind of just forgot about CLG. I was like, I said mine was 100T, then you said CLG. I was like, oh yeah, CLG. Like
And then
I
you're
totally
like, I
forgot about
can't
them.
change it now. I can't go back.
Well, I can't go back, but I mean, I'm glad that CLG won. They definitely deserved it.
Yeah, they did. When you see a team that's so bad change one player and get so good, especially like honestly, even though I thought Dokla was obviously much improved as well, it's not like I didn't think that he was that spectacular that that's why the team got better. Obviously, you have to point to the whole team altogether getting better, and a lot of that comes with the coach. Then predictions for most improved player. Now this is where I would say Dokla could obviously fit in there, but contracts should definitely fit in there. I think I would go contracts, right?
Well, my pick's Palafox personally. Um,
Mm.
Mainly because I thought he was a player that CLG should have subbed out. Obviously, they did only make that one substitution, which was Dokla for Jenkins, and I thought that Palafox was kind of closer to Jenkins in terms of individual performances. Obviously, Contracts didn't have his best split either, but to me, Palafox consistently, he was kind of like all bad without the good, whereas like Contracts had like a lot of bad, but still some good. Whereas, I thought
Yeah.
with Palafox, I was like, dude, this is like the third split in a row now we've seen of this guy. Very hyped academy prospect, hasn't looked very good. But summer split, man, like this guy really turned it around. Had a really unique take on the mid lane meta compared to most of the mid laners in the league. I can't recall any other mid laner that has played all of Silas, Akali, Yone, and I mean, I guess those are the main three, Silas, Akali, and Yone, but he plays a lot of those, plays a lot of aggressive stuff in the mid lane, and looked really good this split. I thought he was kind of close behind for me in terms of my mid lane all pro voting. Mid lane was obviously really, really close, but he was a person I considered for that third spot.
So I guess I think you make a fair point about like the Palafox had no good, like he was just all bad with no good, and Contracts had a little bit of good. I just think the little bit of good that he had in spring was so limited, and I think his bad was so much worse than Palafox. So I guess what I'm saying in short is I think Palafox, or rather Contracts, was worse than Palafox in spring and better than him in summer, in my opinion. So I'm going with Contracts, and I if that's my pick, but also my prediction for who the league is going to pick is also Contracts, I think. Um, but yeah, there's a few CLG players that obviously should be in for contention. Apparently, Dokla's not in for contention for some reason
Interesting.
because he didn't play, whatever. But
Oh,
like we've seen him play in the past. Like, come on.
yeah,
Regardless, though, for me, I don't think it would be Dokla anyways. I still think it would be Contracts.
I'm trying to think of like any not. I mean, because somebody on CLG is obviously going to be the
Yeah,
go-to choice here.
stand
Most
out.
likely, probably going to be CLG or sorry, going to be Contracts or Palafox if Dokla is ineligible. But I can't really think of any non-CLG player that you'd really put in there.
Yeah, give me a little bit. Give me 20 seconds or so to think about this. Hmm.
Maybe like
Immortals, someone?
definitely not.
Ignar just joined, right?
Yeah, he only just joined the split.
Destiny was trash, but he's not there anymore. The ADs are changed
Yeah,
for
honestly,
Immortals.
it's hard to even think about
PoE.
anybody non-CLG related. It's
Yeah.
fun. It's funny because the players who I think about for most improved are ones who were already good players, were slumping, and then got back to being good again.
Yeah.
And you're not going to pick like maybe that's part of the reason why I didn't really consider Contracts as much as I maybe should have. But I think regardless, I still think that Palafox should win it in my opinion. But we've already seen Contracts be a pretty good jungler, and I mean maybe that's just for whatever reason like throwing me off a bit.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. That's what announced this weekend coming up.
Yeah, they'll be during the broadcast or right before it or something like that. We have another loaded weekend, four more games. First
Yeah,
game on
speaking of this weekend
Thursday.
coming up, oh baby.
We got the TLCLG banger. Um, yeah,
I'm going 3-0 TL.
yeah, it's hard
Hesitantly.
trying to.
I feel comfortable with no predictions anymore. After what happened this weekend, I don't feel comfortable at all. I guess I did predict 3-2 100 Thieves, but I also just thought C9 didn't have a shot against EG. And now I'm like Monka S with all my predictions now. It's like, do I really think TL's going to 3-0? Maybe.
I think I'm gonna go with the 3-1 on TL side, and I think part of it is because I'm not really as high on Team Liquid as you are. Regardless of the performance in this past series, I think this series that they just had didn't really change my opinion of Team Liquid too
Still
much.
some worrying trends for you?
It's just more like if they don't win the early game, like then it's really difficult, and I don't think CLG are just gonna get rolled over. I expect even if they do get behind, 1-0, 2-0, I expect CLG to throw a lot of different looks at them. And I think that's partially because the sort of the champion pools of Dokla and Palafox are a lot different from the meta. Yone specifically, nobody's picking that champion at all except for CLG. So I think that should be something that they focus on in the draft, whether that's a ban or potentially having to pick it away themselves. I would also say that Seraphine will be a contested pick in this series, and I think CLG could definitely get away with a win should they get an ideal Seraphine comp, because
I don't think
both
TL's
teams
given anyone Seraphine. That's my guess. I don't know, but I don't think TL's given anyone Seraphine
maybe
anymore.
they're ones to play it, so that's part of the reason why I think there's chances that they
Yeah,
leave it up in the
they are.
draft, and if it falls to them and they like to see the Seraphine Swain look, I think it's a possibility. But TL playing the pick is part of the reason why I think that they might have the balls to leave it up. But Luger and Poom also have interesting champion pools with their Enchanter play. Obviously, they were kind of playing Enchanters before Enchanters became meta. They're playing it more towards the start of the split, and I still think that Luger could do a serviceable job on a Zeri or a Sivir if given the opportunity. Obviously, didn't have the greatest look on the Golden Guardian series and specifically the Cloud9
That's where
series,
I'm at right now. I'm having a
but
hard time getting past that series that we just watched, man. And like, yeah, I know that's some recency bias, but like, bruh, it was Golden Guardians. They haven't looked good at anything in what, 2 months now?
yeah, I mean they've looked horrible, but I don't think I can completely count out CLG because I don't have 100% faith in team like COULDN. I mean
And
CLG,
CLG
it's
didn't
not
look
like
bad before that. Yeah, I don't
well
want to just completely dismiss their whole split. I don't.
I was gonna say
But
like they didn't just fluke their way to fourth place in the regular split, and it might have
yeah.
felt like that for a little while, but at the end of it, like they earned that fourth spot, and that's got to count for something.
Yeah, the difference simply comes down to you and I having different opinions on TL mostly, I think.
Yeah, three
Yeah.
one, 3-0 for you. Next up on Friday, you have TSM versus EG. Now this is a series I am definitely more convinced about in terms of my opinions of both teams. I think this one is going to be the 3-0 stomp, EG versus
EG
TSM.
needs to 3-0. For people, what I'm talking about here is for people to regain confidence in EG after what was obviously not a good series. They need to 3-0 this series. They should be better in every single role. They need that. Yeah, they
Well,
should
they
be
are
better in every
better,
single
not
role.
should. They are. It's just like kind of a
Well, I
fact.
don't know. Impact hasn't really looked the greatest, and I gotta give credit to Solo. I didn't mention Solo. He actually had, or maybe I didn't mention Solo enough. I should say he actually had some pretty nice Gnar games. I mean, that's like almost all he
Nar.
played. I think he played
That's the
mostly Gnar,
meme.
and then he played an Ornn game. Did he play anything else?
I don't know, but
Regardless, he
that's
had
the
good
meme with
games.
Solo. I love it.
Yeah, I know.
He plays Dino Nar, Astronaut
Yeah,
Nar,
he names all the.
Gentleman Nar.
That's not even a solo meme. That's like a. There's a bunch of. Wasn't that a thing
I've
with
just
like
been hearing
Armut
it.
and a bunch of top laners? Like
Yeah, I just recently been hearing it a lot with Solo, but I think that meme's hilarious.
it is a funny meme. Yeah, it is. It's actually
I
pretty good.
I guess not even EG just being so much better of a team than TSM. They kind of will have like a bit of a fire under their asses after that Cloud9 series because
Yeah.
they obviously still perceive themselves to be the best team in the league. And if they didn't, that's just, I don't know, poor mentality,
Well,
I
and
guess, and a poor mindset. So I kind of expect them to come into the series wanting to kick TSM's ass, and I think they
on the
will
other
just
side of
because of how
things,
much better
though,
they are.
on the other side, like this could be the thing that saves TSM's season from like I still they're still in disaster territory if you ask me. They beat FlyQuest, sure, but that's not saving like if they beat EG, that saves a lot of like the look of this org that has continued to crumble. I just think that's a really tall task. But yeah. 3-0 EG for me. 100 Thief C9. Oh baby.
Yeah, 100 Thieves C9 would be our upper bracket, last matchup in the upper bracket, with the winner going to Chicago. We
You
auto
already know
seeded.
who I'm taking.
Well, you're picking 100 Thieves. We all know that.
Uh-huh.
Now the question is the score line
3-1.
because
I'll
okay,
give C9 a
3-1.
game.
So I'm gonna roll with 100 Thieves as well. It's like I said, it's a bit difficult to. I'm never a person to throw a lot of stock into 1 week of performance, whether it's good or bad. So I'm not going into this series with the expectation that we're going to see the same Cloud9 that we did in the EG series. And in the same breath, I don't expect 100 Thieves to be underperforming like EG was in that series because I've said it for the
Yeah.
past, it feels like 1 month now. 100 Thieves to me feel like the most consistent team right now. And in a year where we've had a ton of up and downs from various teams, Cloud9 included, TL included, consistency is key. And while I do have it closer with the 3-2, I think part of the reason why I favor 100 Thieves is I just think they're going to have many more ways to win in comparison to Cloud9. Because while Fudge, he had a better weekend this last weekend, and while Blabber had a much improved weekend relative to the rest of his regular season, Someday has been the clear-cut best top in the league and has been good proficient on carries and tanks like he's always been for the most part.
Yeah.
Closer, he's got the upper hand of Blabber the last 2 times these teams have played in best of fives. I can't recall exactly, but I believe it was 3-1 and 3-0 in 100 Thieves' favor the last 2 times these guys have played best of fives. Closer, he seems to have that clutch gene in him, which Blabber sometimes has, sometimes doesn't have, so it's hard to say there.
The performance that we saw out of Blabber this last weekend makes this matchup a lot more interesting, I think, in the jungle specifically.
And then lastly, with the bot lane, I just think 100 Thieves have more tools. We see it with the Seraphine and the Senna lanes. We just see it with unconventional bot lanes from 100 Thieves, where from Cloud9, we're just going to see
You think
Zeri or
Zeri's getting
Sivir.
through?
Well, I think they'll probably take the trade. I would assume they'll probably test the waters in the first game, maybe leave it up. Depends obviously who's on what side. I'm going to assume that 100 Thieves, being the higher seed, they get side selection. They'll probably pick blue side. So it'll probably be on Cloud9's onus to either ban the Zeri or take the Sivir Zeri trade. But I just think we're going to see a much more traditional Cloud9 with hyper game carry, enchanter pick, whereas 100 Thieves, they got so many tools in the toolbox where I think over a 5 game series, that's where they're going to get the upper hand. The only place where I really have a big advantage for Cloud9 is probably the mid lane. And I say big advantage. The
Really?
advantage isn't even that big. It's just mostly because I feel a little more confident just career track wise
Really?
record with Jensen than Abadage. Jensen's always
Hmm.
been one of the best performers in international playoff performance, and that's when the pressure's on. And
That is
Abadage,
true,
we've seen a bit of choking from him.
but we're not at international performance yet, though. So I do. It's funny that you bring that up
Well, I
because I
said
was going to
playoffs
bring
as
that
well.
up. Oh, okay. I was going to bring up that like um Jensen was the best performer North America had last year at Worlds. I will continue to not let people forget that. Unfortunately, we're not there yet, though. We're not there yet. But I do think it is fair to make the comparison that like games matter now. And so it's not necessarily Jensen performing only at Worlds. It's performing once the pressure is on. And I think the pressure is on. So I do think there is some fairness in what you're saying there. Would I give him the advantage over Abadage? I don't think so. Abba's had a pretty damn good, I don't know, 2 or 3 months now. So I'm still giving the edge to Abba.
It's fair. And I mean, we do have another game on Sunday. That will be the winners of the TSM EG series
And
versus,
now we have to decide JNT
yeah, the TL and
because we think
CLG
it's
series.
TL or EG.
Well, we both picked it as, TL was going to win and EG was going to win, so we'll play a bit of a hypothetical here.
Yeah.
Sunday's match would be EG versus Team Liquid. Winner goes to Worlds. Who is winning?
This is disaster, man. I am so like, oh, I really wanted both of these teams to go, man. I don't know. God, I actually think TL.
Wow.
I know you're going with EG. I already know it because you've already said that you don't have that much faith in TL. I worry when a team starts to crumble. It's not the first time we've seen a team crumble before Worlds. TSM did it. C9 did it. Like these first seed kind of things, right?
Yeah, I
I'm
guess
afraid that we might get another one.
I wouldn't. I definitely agree with you that we've seen teams crumble, and that's I think something that might be in the back of EG's mind, or maybe not even their mind, but the fans' mind when it comes to picking these matches. But EG, I mean, let's be honest here a little bit. It's just been that one series,
One weekend, yeah.
and I think I don't know. I just think that TL looks no different than they have since like for the majority of the split. I don't feel like they've improved a whole lot. I don't think they have, they've learned a whole lot in terms of having like a wide variety of strategies and ways to win. Because unfortunately, to me, it just seems like TL's game plan is win lane, and that's how they win the game. And they don't
I
really
will
win the
admit
other
that
game.
this episode I've been very different as far as like recency bias. I admit that.
And
Like
that's fair. I mean,
EG has a bad weekend and I'm like now I'm picking TL to go to Worlds over them, or like CLG had a bad weekend and now like I'm picking CLG to get 3-0'd. I will admit there's some recency bias there.
what I will say though is I do think that it's more likely that EG cracks under the pressure. But I just think that for the most part, EG, I have them, as I kind of mentioned earlier before, I did not have TL in that 100 Thieves EG level, whereas you did. And with what I've seen, even despite EG struggles, I don't really think I can put them in that same tier. And I'm going with the EG 3-1. I don't know if you said your game prediction, but you said you were picking TL, but I have EG on the 3-1. I think the main thing, obviously, that they need to watch out for is just TL's pocket picks. And I think should EG ever get a lead in the series, whether it's just a 1 win or the 2 wins, you need to shift your priority in the draft to these pocket picks that TL is going to look to bring out. Because to me, it seemed to be their only option whatsoever in that 100 Thieves series. Because apart from those 2 games, it was just a complete wash.
Yeah, I'm gonna go 3-2 for TL. Um, I don't even get too far into a hypothetical series, but I'll bring up another hypothetical that again I don't want to dive too far into. What if it was CLG versus TSM?
Banger.
That would be fucked.
Banger. That's what I'm rooting
That would
for
be
actually now.
disaster. That would be pure disaster.
That's what I'm rooting for now.
I do not want that to happen. You're
Why?
not like me because I want our teams to be good at Worlds.
But if they're not good, they shouldn't go to Worlds. Like if TL and EG
Yeah.
flame out, and what if CLG and TSM look good against them? Like
It's
what?
like it's weird because it's really not fair what I'm doing here. But what I'm doing is like if TL wins, it's like I'm convinced they're good. If EG wins, I'm convinced they're good. If TSM or CLG win, I'm not convinced they're good. So it's really not fair if I'm being completely honest. But I mean, it doesn't change how I feel. What can I say?
I mean, nevertheless, I think the games this weekend are going to be good, mainly because when world spots are on the line, the games just always feel super exciting. I'm trying to think of the most recent ones, but I guess last year and the year before was Cloud9 versus TSM in really, really close series. Last year was a 3-2 in C9's favor. The year before was a 3-1 in TSM's favor. Season 9, I'm trying to think about what it was. Escaping me, but it was 100 Thieves versus somebody. I think it was 100 Thieves versus TSM, and that was a
CLG,
3-2.
no? In
Oh yeah.
2019, you're saying?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, 2018 was Clutch
We were
and
there.
CLG.
We were in Detroit, right?
Yeah, we
For
were. We
the
were. 2018 was 100 Thieves. TSM or 100 T beat them on a 3-2. But
yeah, ding dong.
my point is, when world seeds are on the line, the matches just always seem to be exciting. So
Yeah, dude, I like the LCS right now is so good, man. It is so good. I am way too fired up.
yeah,
Yeah.
gonna be exciting next week. But let's move on to some quick news because we got some worlds updates. We did it a little bit last week. We found out that Gen G, T1, and G2 had already qualified to go to Worlds, mostly because the LCK playoffs were already well underway, and G2 had enough championship points to get
Is this
auto-seeded.
this is a spoiler alert, right? For all this stuff?
Yeah, okay, true. Fair warning, spoiler alert, because we're probably going to talk a little bit about some of the playoff series from around the world. Over in the LPL, both Top Esports and GADG have qualified to the main stage, and what that means is those 2 teams are going to be either 1 or 2. It'll depend on the result of the LPL finals. I don't believe that both of them are confirmed in the LPL finals. I think only JDG is so far. I mean, Top Esports maybe because they just beat EEG in the lower bracket. Not exactly sure, but LPL is looking really, really strong this year. In the LCK, while Gen G did beat T1 in the finals, that confirms that Gen G is going as seed 1, T1 as seed 2, and the other 2 seeds will be determined by the regional qualifier later, I believe, next week. Um, Going on to the LEC, Rogue and Mad Lions have also qualified to minimum the play-in stage. Can obviously change depending on where they finish in the playoffs. I talked a little bit about this last week, but I still don't really understand how the EU, the LEC world seeding works. I know it has something to do with championship points, but it does seem a bit shite that Mad Lions has already qualified for worlds when they haven't even won a single playoff series. In G2's case, yes, they qualified last week before playoffs had even started, but at least they went out and kind of destroyed Misfits. This week, Mad Lions and Rogue had a really, really close series with Rogue beating out Mad Lions in the 5-game banger. But Mad Lions can literally just lose their next series, still qualify, so it kind of sucks there. But I think we recognize that Mad Lions is a really, really good team, and I think a lot of people want to see them on the world stage. So I think presumably they're going to turn it around, but it would just suck to see if they just went 0-2. Lastly, we already talked about it. LCS, 100 Thieves and Cloud9 have already qualified. With seeding can be approved should either of these teams make it to the grand finals or win the grand finals. And last up, we got some wild card regioned bangers. Isurus out of the LLA, they qualified for their play-in slot. Can't name anybody on that roster. I know that this is a team that's represented at Worlds a couple times in the past. They've never made it past the play-in stage. I'm trying to think of even one player that's on this team. Maybe Seiya? Seiya's been on that team before, I think.
I don't know, man.
He's like a pretty famous Latin America mid laner. I'm gonna go with Seiya, and hopefully I'm right about that. Other Worlds news, just this morning, they announced that they redid the Summoners Cup, which is now sponsored by Tiffany, which is like a jeweler. It looks like poop. I don't even know what to say. Like the iconic Summoners Cup, they just changed it into this like simplistic metallic trophy as opposed to this like bedazzled like
The other trophy looks so much better.
yeah, it looks epic. I don't know, like
Looks so much better. This is like you know the meme where it's like, "Mom, can I have this?" Well, we have this at home. We
yeah,
have Summoner's Cup at home. This is the Summoner's Cup at home, man.
yeah. It,
That
loo-
thing
uh,
stinks.
yeah, it looks like a silver. It looks like a silver glass with handles, whereas the
Yeah.
previous world, like the previous Summoners Cup, looked like a trophy.
Whatever, man. The trophy is not what it looks like. It's about what it means and blah 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 blah. Would I prefer it to look better? Yeah, absolutely. But let's be honest, winning is the trophy. You know what I mean?
Last piece of World's news here: the new Udyr, the reworked Udyr, is disabled for Worlds. Not
I
too big a
haven't seen
surprise.
almost anything about it, but I heard it's pretty cool looking.
I heard it's okay, despite the fact whether it looks cool or not. I heard it's kind of dog shit. So
Oh,
I don't know. I haven't really been in a position to play any league,
you're
or
talking
else I
about the
would.
champion, right?
Yeah,
You're
I'm
talking
talking about
saying
the
the champion
champion.
stock. Wasn't
Yeah.
Medio saying that it was awesome?
Well, is awesome good or is awesome like cool to play because the champion got reworked?
I thought he was saying it was OP, but I don't know.
Maybe I
I
don't
don't
know.
know anything about it, so whatever.
Yeah. And then last up, not Worlds news, but the LPL is apparently expanding to 19 teams next split. That's not confirmed. It's a rumor. But
That's pretty crazy,
the
though.
source seems to be pretty reliable.
You know who
Um,
one of them is, eh?
one of what? The teams?
TSM.
Oh my God. I mean, they could honestly. Honestly, it just feels like the writing is on the wall for TSM to leave the LCS
Wouldn't that be crazy if TSM is just LPL bound? There was the like
or LEC
TSM had
bound.
been yeah. TSM had been pretty vocal that like they were kind of shifting more towards an LPL kind of thing. That's what because they had Peter Zhang and they were like importing a bunch of Chinese players and like it was pretty clear that they wanted to be the North American version of an LPL team. And I don't know if that's still the case ever since the Peter Zhang stuff or since all of this year,
Yeah, well, none of
honestly.
it's worked out. I mean, that's the main thing. The Kaido
Yeah.
signing, the Shinyi signing,
Yeah, but you could
even
argue like those players shouldn't have been signed, and maybe they were just signed because what's his face was getting a paycheck for it because Peter Zhang was pocketing, like you know.
I mean maybe, but
Yeah,
it's hard
that's
to
still a
say.
mess.
I mean,
That's still crazy.
my point is that a move like this for TSM feels like it's coming at the worst time because their performance is so bad. It's hard to find, you know, value that they're going to bring to another league, whether that's the LPL or whether that's the LEC, because their brand just seems to be at an all-time low. Not
I
even
don't
League
think
of
they should
Legends
move to
related.
either,
Yeah, I don't think they should move. I don't think they have a
but
place in EU or in China.
if they move to the LPL, I think that would be better for them than if they move to the LEC. That's what I will say. I think they would be still a punching bag, but far less of a punching bag than they would be if they went to Europe. But
Probably.
I think they should stay in North America. But I mean, obviously, I would say that I'm biased.
Yeah,
Is that it for this episode?
that is it.
Okay, we made it through the whole episode without my internet going out. We appreciate all of you guys sticking with us through different circumstances because yes, we have different audio this week and we're in different locations and things are changing. We think things should be back to like a new normal by mid-September
A
question
new
mark.
normal. It's
Well, a new
funny.
normal because you'll be in a new place.
Yeah, I'll be in another new place,
You
but
won't be moving
hopefully,
around all over the place. You'll be able to settle and
yes, yes.
get beast internet, right?
We already got it, bro.
And it's beast internet, I'm sure. And yeah, and then maybe we could start to have a regular schedule again and whatnot and all that stuff. But anyways, we appreciate everyone's patience. We appreciate you all for, again, subscribing, hitting the like button. That stuff helps us out tremendously. Please continue to do that if you're enjoying the episodes, and enjoy the playoffs. They are so good right now. Keep watching, guys, and you will not be disappointed. We'll see you guys next week. This has been episode 98 of the Clown Fiesta podcast. Goodbye.